Studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is July the 4th, 185th day of the year. Just 180 days remain to the year's over with. It's also Independence Day, commemorating the adoption of the Declaration of Independence in 1776. And that document declared the 13 colonies separate from Great Britain. It's a federal holiday, celebrated by fireworks and parades and family gatherings. Of course, Democrats and a lot of the other leftists are urging a boycott. They don't believe the 4th has any meaning because of our current president. Now, other than the 4th, let's talk about other holidays and observances. It's National Caesar Salad Day, Alice in Wonderland Day, National Barbecued Spare Ribs Day, Independence Meat Day. See what the vegetarian and vegan lifestyle is all about. Jackfruit Day, National Hillbilly Day, Invisible Day, Filipino-American Friendship Day, Comic Sans Day, Sidewalk Egg Frying Day, Caribbean Community Day, Indivisible Day, Independence Day, we talked about that, Wife Carrying Race, Alice Springs Show Day, Wimbledon, which goes on to the 13th, Amagang Pageant, which is celebrated in Brussels, if I'm not mistaken. It goes from the 2nd to the 4th. Rabbit Week, Sweetness Week, Famous People Born on the State, Post Malone. All right, let's see what we've got in the news. There's always something in the news. Of course, with everything going on internationally, you never know what's going to pop up. President Trump has unveiled a plan that put Iowa farmers in charge of migrant workers. His plan allows farmers to vouch for illegal immigrant workers who are facing deportation. They can delay the deportation of law-abiding workers who've worked for them for years, which is a rule that actually shows some sense, which is amazing coming out of Washington. The proposed process was shared by President Trump during an event at the Iowa State Fair, kicking off a year patriotic celebrations meant to honor the nation's 250th birthday. He said this new plan will take place in coordination with the Department of Homeland Security, and legislation for that measure is currently being drafted. He said, we've had people who have worked for, they come up, it used to be called the Bracero program. They'd come up and they'd work and they'd go back home, as opposed to the Biden open door policy where they come up here and screw you, pay us. Well, there are 5 major policies to know from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. The bill was passed, extended 2017 tax cuts, created new deductions for tipped income and capital investments. Makes permanent the lower tax brackets with revised income thresholds. It also makes the standard deduction, which is roughly doubled under the TCJA, permanent ahead of its scheduled expiration this year. The bill also increased the deduction to $750 for individuals and $1,500 for married couples and $1,125 for the head of a household. That's effective this year. About 90% of federal taxpayers use the standard deduction rather than itemized deductions. that restored the immediate 100% expensing of capital investment that was temporarily permitted by the TCJA and applies it retroactively to investments made on or after January 19th, 2025. The bill also made permanent the 20% deduction for small businesses, including sole proprietorships, partnerships, and S corporations, to deduct up to 20% of their qualified business income, plus 20% of qualified real estate investment trust dividends and qualified publicly traded partnership income. Also created a new inflation-adjusted minimum deduction of $400 for taxpayers with at least $1,000 in qualified business income to ensure access an enhanced baseline deduction. Provided a $6,000 bonus deduction for taxpayers 65 and older on top of the standard deduction available to all taxpayers, and in addition to the existing extra standard deduction of $2,000 for single filers and $1,600 for qualifying spouse for joint filers 65 and up. Now, this $6,000 bonus deduction is temporary and be in effect through 2028. Phases for higher income retirees, with the full deduction available to individuals with incomes up to $75,000 or $150,000 for joint filers. Phases out entirely for individuals earning over $175,000 and couples earning over $250,000. And this is what the Democrats fought so hard to stop. Well, tipped workers such as restaurant servers, barbers, and drivers will be able to deduct up to $25,000 in qualified tips. So it was certainly a benefit to most folks that the Democrats tried so hard to stop. New York City mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani, identified as Black, Asian, on our Columbia application. Even though he now says he doesn't consider himself Black. According to the Times, the internal data came from a leaked database of past Columbia applications. It was part of a recent hack targeting the Ivy League school. President Trump said, "I've heard he's a total nut job." National anthem sing-along at a San Diego soccer match became a profound metaphor for American unity, despite everybody having differences. The Pentagon has sent 200 Marines to Florida's military aid has been ordered for ICE missions. Rip Current beach rescues show swimmers face deadly risk. An expert has shared safety tips and drowning risk as the East Coast rescues pro hundreds from rip currents leading up to the 4th of July. Well, James Seymour, who I first saw in Battlestar Galactica and thought she was absolutely gorgeous, says she's the same size since age 17 without going on any crazy diets. She now does a show called Harry Wild, which is a detective murder mystery. She rejected plastic surgery in favor of traditional exercises and believes women can be full-blooded at any age. Says she's now the size she was when she was 17 and a ballet dancer. She is 74. She's gotten bigger over the years, but never gained more than 10 pounds. She was smaller when she was in 1988's War and Remembrance, when she played Wallace Simpson, where she had to be crazy thin and wasn't a healthy weight, but made her immune system weak. All right. Tulsa Gabbard's accused a Washington Post reporter of actively harassing staff. Post executive editor Matt Murray claimed the National Intelligence Director's claims are unfounded. She said, it's coming to my attention, Washington Post reporter Nakashimi Mai appears to be actively harassing the Office of the Director of National Intelligence Staff. Instead of reaching out to the press office, she's calling high-level intelligence officers from a burner phone, refuses to identify herself, lies about the fact she works for the Post, and then demands they share sensitive information. Yeah. President Joe Biden claims he's getting calls from European leaders wanting him to get engaged and try to rein in President Trump. He says even Democratic Republican colleagues are calling him for advice. I have to wonder about that. Flash flood emergencies have been issued in Texas after up to 15 inches of rain. It's rained a good bit here. Now let's see. Liberal pundit L.M. Stahl has called the U.S. a menace to peaceful people everywhere. He says the U.S. is the bad guy on the world stage and ought to face international sanctions just like North Korea. Of course, as you might guess, Stahl is a far-left political commentator. She appeared on the Joy Reid show on Wednesday and said the U.S. should be treated like a rogue state. My suggestion is, if you're not happy, there's the door. Use it. All right. Red Sox stars shook hands with President Trump in a surprise Oval Office visit during a D.C. trip. A study that I do not support suggests just one hot dog a day could raise disease risk. But of course there are caveats. Processed meats and sugary drinks are linked to diabetes, heart disease, and cancer, but limitations do exist. Some of these health experts, they get on the internet and pontificate. Just make me feel tired. Well, America's oldest Independence Day parade marks 240 years of patriotic tradition. It's in Bristol, quaint New England town. Bristol, Rhode Island, began hosting these celebrations in 1785. Reverend Henry White of the First Congregational Church, a Revolutionary veteran, conducted the first known patriotic exercises according to the parade's website. It's believed the festivities evolved from a procession of community workers walking to patriotic exercises. Then in the early 1800s, it became a more formal parade, including the military, civic, and firemen's parade. Now, Rubio was recalled a U.S. diplomat after what he says are baseless claims by Colombia, alleging drugs and the fact they don't like President Trump. His new documentary features LGBTQ celebrities who are divided on Stars and Stripes. It's called Reclaim the Flag. Former Biden Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre is among 50 participants who share their perspective on the American flag. So we've got less than 3% of the population wanting to dictate to the rest of us. Well, Air Force veteran who donated 2 organs poses as a 40s pinup model. Maryland veteran Lindsay Gutierrez donated her kidney to a fellow veteran before giving 40% of her liver to save another's life. She sustained a traumatic brain injury while on duty but she says she's determined to help other veterans in need. She served 6 years and became a double organ donor, making her one of the 280 people in the U.S. who've donated 2 organs to save lives. She's now appearing in Pinups for Vets' 20th annual fundraiser calendar for 2026. Features 13 female veterans from across the country who've been photographed in vintage style. All right. Military heroes are obliterated. Iranian targets are coming to the White House celebrations. Illinois' population is aging faster than the rest of the country. Nearly half of high school graduates leave for out-of-state colleges, with 70% never going back to Illinois. According to Chicago Tribune, a dwindling youth population means shrinking potential, not just economically, but in civic energy, creativity, community life. The editorial board of the Chicago Tribune has urged Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker to take action on this issue, citing the state desperately needs to retain and attract young folks. My suggestion would be quit talking like a moron when you attack President Trump in the media. Well, left-wing groups are still claiming they want a moratorium on the 4th of July celebrations, while the right sees a patriotic revival. This new poll reveals stark patriotic gap. Some Democrats are going to be taken to the street to protest on America's birthday. This polls indicate a decreased sense of patriotism from those on the left. Democrats across the country are organizing protests and boycotts on the 4th to make their voices heard. They don't agree with the direction the country's heading. How dare we say we don't want criminals here? They have every right to come. Just ask any Democrat. The polls show that only 36% of Democrats say they're proud of the U.S., compared to 85% of Republicans. And what some are calling the No Kings 2.0 protest, Democrats are banding together in several states to lay out their grievances. They don't understand why they didn't want a senile old man to be president or a moron. Women's March, whose mission is to transform everyday women into feminists, is calling on protesters to join their Free America weekend. According to their website, we must free America from the grip of greedy billionaires who rig the system for themselves. Well, there's a lot of billionaires on the left, and one of the most reprehensible, in my humble opinion, is the founder of Facebook. I was kicked off for not being liberal enough. All right. New survey has identified the top 5 cities for 4th of July celebrations, as well as the worst. Top 5 is Las Vegas, Nevada is number 1. Fireworks are going to light up the sky for about 15 minutes. New York is number 2 for July 4th. Leads the country in terms of affordable eats. Big Apple's fireworks show lasts 25 minutes, but residents can't have their own. Oh no. Number 3 is Los Angeles. Number 4 is Minneapolis. Number 5 is St. Paul. The worst 5 cities for 4th of July celebrations. Newark, New Jersey. Aurora, Colorado. Laredo, Texas. It's being ranked the worst for attractions, weather, affordability, and safety. Cleveland, Ohio is number 4, and number 5 is Jersey City, New Jersey. All right. Haiti is spiraling toward a catastrophe as gangs have seized 90% of the capital city. In fact, the violent criminal gangs have near total control over that town. UN officials call for increased international action to prevent complete government breakdown. Gangs control an estimated 90% of Port-au-Prince. Godefroy Wale, executive director of the UN Office of Drugs and Crime, told the UN Security Council. And gangs are expanding into previously peaceful areas. Southern Haiti, which until recently was insulated from the violence, seen a sharp increase in gang-related incidents. Gangs have gained power since President Jovenel Moïse assassination in July 2021. Haiti really hadn't had a president since that assassination. And it's turning into a massive trash dump. Well, the British band that started the anti-IDF chant can't understand why they had a negative backlash for anti-Israel chants at the Glastonbury Festival. Astronaut photographs an elusive luminous event far above the Earth. Sprites are a type of transient luminous event that often appear high above powerful thunderstorms. Other examples of transient luminous events are elves and blue jets and ghosts, all of which are very poorly understood. But an astronaut on board the International Space Station shared a photograph of what's known as a transient luminous event, seen above a thunderstorm over Mexico in the desert southwest earlier this week. NASA astronaut Nicole Vapor Ayers posted an image on social media and said, just wow. Well, a Colorado man's been sentenced to life in prison for a DUI that killed an Air Force veteran and injured his children. Paul Stevenson, 57, was sentenced to life in prison after he's found guilty of driving drunk and killing an Air Force veteran, Lieutenant Colonel Matt Anderson. He was convicted in April. Crashed his truck into their vehicle while driving drunk in August of 2024. Stopped at a 7-Eleven gas station with his family following a trip to the Douglas County Fair when he was killed. Anderson, the victim. His wife was walking into the store when Stevenson drove his Chevy Silverado into their vehicle. While in court, Stevenson admitted to drinking a bottle of Fireball whiskey and 2 beers before driving, and his blood alcohol was 2.5 times the legal limit. Killing Anderson was his 3rd DUI conviction. District Attorney George Brockler said his office pursued the first-degree murder charge to send a message to drunk drivers in Douglas County. Well, a lot of folks are not happy with John Brennan, former head of the CIA. 5 key details emerged about how intelligence was manipulated to undermine the Trump presidency. The CIA released fresh details yesterday about the creation of, nearly 10 years ago, the agency's intelligence community assessment of Russia's influence campaign on the 2016 U.S. presidential election. It found that President Vladimir Putin aspired to help then-candidate Donald Trump win the election. That assessment, ordered by then-President Barack Obama and executed by Brennan, ignited the Trump-Russia hoax that haunt Trump's presidency for 4 years. Now, and looking at what Brennan used, he lied about his use of the discredited Steele dossier. He told the Wall Street Journal he never read it and gave it no particular credence, but he was lying. His former staffers now admit he pushed for the inclusion of that dossier, and despite warnings from his top operational analytical management, the dossier didn't meet the most basic tradecraft standards. He said he didn't care. He said it fit the narrative. He manipulated who would rank the ICA, intentionally blocking out other intel agencies and National Intelligence Council. He interfered with the drafting of it. He pushed for the completion of the ICA, even though there wasn't complete information. Brennan and Comey spread it far and wide. In fact, they leaked it. They shared it with more than 200 U.S. officials. They were determined to get Trump. Dr. Phil's media empire files a $100 million lawsuit against Christian network partner. All right, a satellite anomaly has sparked a hunt for Amelia Earhart's airplane on a remote island. Maybe they'll find her living in a tent and having barbecue. All right. Well, we were talking about Roswell. Now, for 10 years, I spoke there, talking about UFOs and what have you, until one author played politics with the board, got control, and he was livid that my books were outselling his. Partner called and wanted to know why I didn't put their book on my show. And I said, well, you stopped me from coming, so why should I help you? Well, not a lot of people know that the Roswell UFO incident made headlines in the Roswell paper. I'm looking at the Roswell Daily Record of, what is that? Looks like July. And it said, Roswell Army Air Force captures flying saucer on a ranch in the Roswell region. Now below that it says no details of the flying disc are being revealed. Now, a couple of days, this was issued on the instructions of Colonel Blanchard, who was the commander of Roswell Army Airfield. Walter Haut, whose daughter started the Roswell Museum, was the public information officer who released it. And a few days later, it had to be stopped. It was a weather balloon. Now, the 509th was the only nuclear unit in the military. In fact, it was 509 pilots who dropped the bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. But according to the military, they didn't know enough to distinguish a weather balloon from a UFO. Now, I've heard the term Roswell Incident bandied about, and I've heard commentators say it means various things. Actually, it refers simply to the 1947 crash of a high-altitude balloon. Now, that is still what the military is saying. This became the subject of a major UFO conspiracy theory. Now, even the military initially described the recovered debris as a flying disc. Later clarified it was a weather balloon in the top secret Project Mogul. Despite the official explanation, of course, the incident fueled speculation about a crashed alien spacecraft and a government cover-up. Now, rancher W. Mac Brazil discovered debris scattered over his property and reported it to the sheriff. The sheriff contacted the Roswell Army Airfield. Now, interestingly enough, when the military got actively involved, they came in like gangbusters, though quietly behind the scenes. We have, my wife has a friend whose uncle, as a boy, used to be a gopher for Mac Brazil. He was from Mexico. And when the CIC, or the Counterintelligence Corps, came in, and they did in swarms, he was threatened to the point he left, went back to Mexico, and refuses to even come for a visit. He was told, if you say anything to anybody, we'll kill you. And he believed him. Now, Roswell Army Airfield initially announced they'd recovered a flying disc. But after General Ramey got involved, that statement was retracted, and the Roswell Daily Record announced it was a weather balloon. Now, allegedly, later investigation revealed the debris was part of the Project Mogul, top secret project aimed at detecting Soviet nuclear tests with altitude balloons equipped with sensitive listening devices over New Mexico for tests being done by the Russians in Russia. Now, despite the official explanation, of course, the Roswell incident became a focal point for UFO enthusiasts and conspiracy theorists. They believe the military covered up the crash of an alien spacecraft. Prospectors and archaeology students who were out in the desert and got to the crash site before the military talked about bodies. And according to the military, that was just their imagination. There were no bodies. Now, some folks point to the discrepancies in the military initial statement, witness accounts of the use of debris, and the secrecy that surrounded the incident. Official Air Force reports and other investigations have concluded that the debris actually came from a weather balloon, and Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer for the base who went out to collect the debris, was just ignorant. Now, the Roswell incident is still a popular target in popular culture. A lot of books and movies and television shows have explored the mystery. After the metallic rubber debris was recovered by Roswell Army Air Force airfield personnel, the Army announced with all seriousness they had captured a flying disc. Made international headlines. Now, in 1978, retired Air Force officer Jesse Marcel revealed the Army's weather balloon claim had been a cover story, and he speculated the debris came from extraterrestrial origin. Popularized by the 1980 book, The Roswell Incident, the speculation became the basis for long-lasting, increasingly complex and contradictory UFO conspiracy theories, which over time expanded the incident to include governments concealing evidence of extraterrestrial beings, gray aliens, multiple crashed flying saucers, alien corpses and autopsies, as well as the reverse engineering of extraterrestrial technology. Now, in the 1990s, the Air Force published multiple reports that established the incident was related to Project Mogul. Despite this and the general lack of evidence, a lot of UFO proponents claim the Roswell debris was in fact derived from an alien spacecraft. The conspiracy narratives become a trope in science fiction literature, film, and television. And the town of Roswell, of course, promotes itself as a destination for UFO-associated tourism. In fact, the annual UFO event's going to be probably tomorrow. Being persona non grata, I'm no longer invited, even though those who are aware of my book still prefer them over the expert who undermine the board of directors. Now, by 1947, according to the story, we'd launched thousands of top-secret Project Mogul balloons carrying devices to listen to the Soviet atomic test. June 4th, researchers at Alamogordo Army Airfield, New Mexico, launched a long train of these balloons, and they lost contact with the balloons and the balloon-borne equipment within 17 miles of Mike Brazil's ranch. Later that month, Brazil discovered tinfoil and rubber and tape and thin wooden beams scattered across several acres of his ranch. Now, with no phone or radio, Brazil had no idea about the ongoing flying disc craze. Mid the first summer of the Cold War, press nationwide was all over Kenneth Arnold's account of what became known as flying saucers, objects that allegedly perform maneuvers beyond the capabilities of any known aircraft. And coverage of his report preceded a wave of over 800 similar sightings. When Brazil visited Corona on July 5th, his uncle Hollis Wilson suggested his debris could be from a flying disc. And hundreds of reports have been made over the 4th of July weekend. Newspapers speculated on the possible Soviet origin, and $3,000 reward was offered for physical proof. That's the equivalent of $42,000 in 2024 money. Well, the next day, Brazil drove into Roswell and informed Sheriff George Wilcox about the debris he found. Wilcox jumped on the phone and called Roswell Army Airfield, home of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force. That's the only unit at the time capable of delivering nuclear weapons. But according to the military, they were too stupid to know the difference between a weather balloon and a UFO. Base assigned Major Jesse Marcel and Captain Sheridan Cavett to go with Brazil and gather up the material from his ranch. Base Commander Colonel William Blanchard notified the 8th Air Force Commanding Officer Roger Ramey about what had been found. On July 8th, Roswell Army Airfield Public Information Officer Walter Haupt issued a press release on the direction of Colonel Blanchard, stating the military recovered a flying disc. Robert Porter, an RAAF flight engineer, is part of the crew that loaded what he was told was a flying saucer into a flight bound from Fort Worth Army Airfield in Texas. He described that material, packaged in wrapping paper when he got it, as lightweight and not too large to fit inside the trunk of a car. When Station Director George Walsh of KSWS broke the news over Roswell radio station and gave it to the Associated Press, his phone lines were overwhelmed. He said later that afternoon, I tried to call Sheriff Wilcox for more information, couldn't get through to him. He said, I was getting calls from people all over the world. Well, Halt's press release said the many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force in Roswell Army Airfield was fortunate enough to gain possession of the disc through the cooperation of one of the local ranchers and the sheriff's office in Chavez County. The flying object landed on a ranch near Roswell sometime last week. Not having phone facilities, the rancher stored the disc until such time as he was able to contact the sheriff's office, who in turn notified Major Jesse Marcel of the 509th Bomb Group Intelligence Office. That was the Associated Press release of July 8, 1947. Now, of course, media interest in the case dissipated soon after a press conference by General Roger Ramey, his Chief of Staff Colonel Thomas Dubois, and Weather Officer Irving Newton identified the material as pieces of a weather balloon. Newton told reporters similar radar targets were used at about 80 weather stations across the country. A small number of subsequent news stories offered mundane and prosaic accounts of the crash. July 9th, the Roswell Daily Record highlighted no engine or metal parts had been found in the wreckage. Brazil told the Record the debris consisted of rubber strips, tinfoil, paper, tape, and sticks. Brazil said he paid little attention to it, but came back later with his wife and daughter to gather up some of the debris. Despite later claims he's forced to repeat a cover story, Brazil told newspaper reporters, "I'm sure what I found was not any weather observation balloon." When interviewed in Fort Worth, Jesse Marcel described the wreckage as parts of the weather device composed of tinfoil and broken wooden beams. Now, the material that I received from Jesse Marcel's son, Dr. Marcel, certainly was not part of a weather balloon. A portion of the material was flown from Texas to Wright Field in Ohio, while Colonel Marcellus Duffy identified it as balloon equipment. Duffy had previous experience with Project Mogul and contacted Mogul's project officer, Albert Trakowski, to discuss the debris. Unable to disclose details about the project, he identified it as meteorological equipment. 1947 official account omitted any connection to Cold War military programs. On July 10th, military personnel at Alamogordo gave a demonstration to the press. 4 officers provided a false account of mundane weather balloon usage throughout the previous year. They demonstrated balloon configurations used by the mobile team as ways to gather meteorological data, offering a plausible explanation for any unusual aspects of the Roswell debris. The Air Force later described the weather balloon story as an attempt to deflect attention from the top-secret Mogul project. Now, the 1947 debris retrieval remained actively obscure for over 30 years. Reports ceased soon after the government provided this mundane explanation, and broader reporting on flying saucers declined rapidly after the Twin Falls saucer hoax. And that particular event, supposedly a flying disc was discovered in Twin Falls, Idaho, July 11, 1947. FBI and Army officials took possession of the disc and proclaimed it to be a hoax. Press reported local teenagers admitted they perpetrated the hoax. Now, of course, they were never going to admit if it landed on the White House lawn, they'd call it a hoax. Just days after stories of the Roswell flying disc, the reported crash disc from Twin Falls, Idaho was found to be a hoax created by 4 teenagers using parts from a jukebox. Well, I've never heard of a UFO playing music, but go figure. Nevertheless, belief in UFO cover-ups by the U.S. government became widespread in this period. Hoaxes, legends, and stories of crashed spaceships and alien bodies in New Mexico emerged that later formed elements of the Roswell story. In 1947, a lot of Americans attributed flying saucers to unknown military aircraft. In the decades between the initial debris recovery and the emergence of Roswell theories, flying saucers became synonymous with alien spacecraft. After the assassination of John Kennedy and the Watergate scandal, trust in the U.S. government declined and acceptance of conspiracy theories became widespread. UFO believers have accused the federal government of a cosmic Watergate. The 1947 incident was reinterpreted to fit the public's increasingly conspiracy-minded outlook. Now, the next alleged hoax was the Aztec, New Mexico crash saucer hoax. It took place in 1948. Introduced stories of recovered alien bodies that later became associated with Roswell. And it got broad exposure when con artists behind it convinced Variety columnist Frank Scully to cover this alleged crash. Now, if you want more information on this and a number of other little-known crashes, I wrote a book called Beyond Roswell. You can get it on Amazon. And it goes into some detail. In spite of rumors to the contrary, these are not all hoaxes. Now, the hoax narrative included small gray humanoid bodies, metal stronger than you found on Earth, indecipherable writing, and government cover-up to prevent public panic. The same elements you find in the Roswell story. In retellings, the mundane debris reported the actual crash site was replaced with the Aztec hoax fantastic alloys. By the time Roswell came back to the public attention, gray aliens became a part of American culture through the Barty and Betty Hill incident. In 1997, Roswell Report Air Force investigator James McAndrew noted even the exposure of the fraud Aztec story still revered by UFO theories. Now keep in mind, our military investigators go in with the instructions, make it go away. So if there's the least bit of question, it's automatically fraud. We've also got the story of Hangar 18, an allegedly non-existent location where a lot of conspiracy theories alleged the government housed extraterrestrial craft or bodies recovered from Roswell. The idea of alien corpses from a crashed spaceship being stored in an Air Force morgue at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base was mentioned in Frank Scully's book Behind the Flying Saucers. Expanded in the 1966 book Incident Exeter and became the basis for a 1968 science fiction novel called The Fortek Conspiracy. Fortek is about a fictional cover-up by the Air Force unit charged with reverse engineering other nations' technical advancements. Now, in 1974, science fiction author and conspiracy theorist Robert Spencer Carr claimed alien bodies recovered from the Aztec crash were stored in Hangar 18 at Wright-Patterson. He claimed his sources witnessed the alien autopsy, another idea later incorporated into the Roswell narrative. The Air Force explained there was no Hangar 18 at that base, noting a similarity between Carr's story and the fictional Fortek conspiracy. The 1980 film Hangar 18, which dramatized Carr's claims, was described as a modern-day dramatization of Roswell by the film's director, James Conway, and his nascent Roswell mythology by folklorist Thomas Bullard. Decades later, Carr's son recalled he'd often mortified his mother and him by spinning preposterous stories in front of strangers. Tales about befriending a giant alligator in the Florida swamps. Well, interest in the Roswell story was rekindled after Stanton Friedman, who I knew fairly well, interviewed Jesse Marcel in 1978. Marcel had accompanied the Roswell debris from the ranch to the Fort Worth press conference. In that interview in 1978, Marcel was adamant the weather balloon explanation from the press conference was a cover story, and he now believed the debris was extraterrestrial. December 19, 1979, Marcel was interviewed by Bob Pratt at the National Enquirer. Tabloid brought large-scale attention to the Marcel story the following February. Marcel described a foil that could be crumpled but uncrumpled when released. September 20th, 1980, TV series In Search Of, hosted by Star Trek actor Leonard Nimoy, aired an interview with Marcel, where he described his participation in the 1947 press conference. He said, they wanted some comments from me, but I wasn't at liberty to do so. So all I could do was keep my mouth shut. General Ramey's the one who discussed everything, told the newspapers what it was, and to forget about it. Nothing more than a weather observation balloon. Of course, we both knew differently. Ufology's interviewed Major Marcel's son, Jesse A. Marcel Jr., MD, who said that when he was 10 years old, his father showed him flying saucer debris recovered from the Roswell crash site, including a small beam with purple-hued hieroglyphics on it. However, the symbols described as alien hieroglyphics match the symbols on adhesive tape that Project Mogul sourced from a new toy manufacturer, at least according to some commentators. The item that Jesse Marcel Jr. gave to me does not look like symbols on an adhesive tape. To publish his research, Stanton Friedman corroborated with childhood friend and author William Moore, who reached out to established paranormal author Charles Berlitz. I got to know all those people. Berlitz previously written about the Bermuda Triangle and had corroborated with Moore to write about the Philadelphia experiment. Moore and Berlitz wrote the 1980 book, The Roswell Incident, and credited Friedman just as an investigator. He popularized Marcel's account and added the claimed discovery of alien bodies found approximately 150 miles west of the original debris site on the plains of St. Augustine Marcel himself never mentioned the presence of bodies. Well, Stanton Friedman, Charles Berlitz, and more also connected Marcel's account to an earlier statement by Lydia Sleppy, a former teletape operator at the KOAT radio station, Albuquerque, New Mexico. She claims she was typing a story about crashed saucer wreckage as dictated by reporter Johnny McBoyle when she was interrupted by an incoming message ordering her to end communications. Between 1978 and 1990, UFO researchers such as Friedman, Moore, and a team of Kevin Randall and somebody whose name I will not mention interviewed many people who claimed to have had a connection with the events at Roswell in 1947. The first Roswell conspiracy book, released in October 1980, was The Roswell Incident by Charles Berlitz and William Moore. Anthropologist Charles Ziegler described the 1980 version of his book as version 1 of the Roswell myth. Berlitz and Moore's narrative was the dominant version of the Roswell conspiracy during the 80s. According to what was written, an extraterrestrial craft was flying over the New Mexico desert to observe nuclear weapons activity when a lightning strike killed the alien crew. According to the book, after recovering the crashed alien technology, the U.S. government engaged in a cover-up to prevent mass panic. Roswell Incident quoted Marcel's later description of debris as nothing made of this earth. The book claims in some photographs the debris recovered by Marcel had been substituted with debris from a Weather Service device despite no visible differences in the photograph material. The book claims of unusual debris were contradicted by the mundane details provided by Captain Sheridan Cabot, who gathered that material with at Roswell with Marcel. And the Roswell Incident also introduced the alien bodies through secondhand legends of the deceased civil engineer Grady Barney Barnett, supposedly found by archaeologists on the plains of St. Augustine. Authors claim to have interviewed over 80 witnesses, through the testimony of only 25 appear in the book. Only 7 of them claimed to have seen the debris, and of those, 5 admitted to having handled it. Some elements of the witness accounts, small alien bodies, indestructible metals, and hieroglyphic writing, matched the crash saucer legends more than the 1947 reports from Roswell. Berlitz and Moore's claimed Scully's long discredited crash social hoax to be an account of the Roswell incident mistakenly placed the crash near Aztec. Now, Mac Brazil died in 1963 before interest in the Roswell debris was revived. Berlitz and Moore interviewed his surviving adult children, William Brazil Jr. and Bessie Brazil Schreiber. Brazil Jr. described how the military arrested his father and swore him to secrecy. During the time Mac Brazil was alleged to have been in military custody, multiple people reported seeing him in Roswell, and he actually gave an interview at a local radio station, KGFL. Schreiber, who had gathered material with her father when she was 14, offered ufologists a description of master materials used by Mogul. She said there was what appeared to be pieces of heavy wax paper and sort of aluminum-like foil. Well, according to the book, some of the most important testimony was given by Marcel, the former intelligence officer who gathered the debris in 47 and claimed to have been part of a cover-up. And the broader UFO media treated Marcel as a whistleblower. Independent researchers claimed they found embellishments in Marcel's accounts, including false statements about his military career and educational background. Now, of course, keep in mind, with government sanction, the media set out to discredit anybody who didn't follow what we used to call the school solution. Now, there was a purported organization known as Majestic 12. It was said to be behind fake government documents delivered anonymously to multiple ufologists in the 1980s. After the publication of the Roswell Incident, Richard Doughty and other individuals presenting themselves as Air Force intelligence officers approached William Moore. They used unfulfilled promises of hard evidence of extraterrestrial retrievers to recruit Moore, who kept notes on other ufologists and intentionally spread misinformation within the UFO community. Now, the earliest known reference to this Majestic 12 comes from a 1981 document used in disinformation targeting Paul Benowitz. 1982, Bob Pratt worked with Dottie and Moore on the Aquarius Project, an unpublished science fiction manuscript about a purported organization. Moore initially planned to do a nonfiction book, but didn't have enough evidence. During a phone call about the manuscript, Moore explained to Pratt his goal was to get as much of the story out with as little fiction as possible. That same year, Moore and Friedman and Jaime Shandera began working on the KPIX TV UFO documentary, and Moore shared the original MJ-12 memo mentioning Benowitz. KPIX TV contacted the Air Force, who noted many style and formatting errors. Allegedly, Moore admitted he had typed and stamped the document as a facsimile. Well, see, the problem is a lot of the so-called experts in the field, a lot of the so-called leaders in the field, do everything they can to keep their name in the press. That's the individual that got me banned from speaking at Roswell. He was the expert. There was no way I could know as much as he did. Now, keeping in mind that I do not discount what he wrote or what he said, I do say he is not the expert he claims to be. And he was guilty of the worst type of fraud in regard to a so-called alien corpse that turned out to be the mummified body of a Native American female. Well, on that note, we've come to the end of today's show. I hope y'all enjoy the 4th. Ignore the left's attempt to boycott it. This country has a lot to be proud of. And if you happen to be around Roswell, go tell them that the Ken Hudnall show mentioned them. On that note, we've come to the end of today's show. We're back to Monday, because today is Friday. And we'll talk more about the strange and unusual. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show, saying have a truly great 4th of July and a fantastic weekend.